The Sackler name appears on the walls of museums and universities across America. The Met, the Louvre, Yale, Oxford. A dynasty of philanthropists whose generosity shaped culture and medicine for generations. Their company, Purdue Pharma, was once valued at over $35 billion, making them one of the richest families in American history. But what those museum plaques don't tell you is that the Sackler fortune was built on the single deadliest corporate product in modern American history. A painkiller that killed more Americans than the entire Vietnam War. Over 500,000 deaths, millions addicted, families destroyed across every state, every income level, every background. This is not a story of a pharmaceutical mistake. This is the story of a calculated deception spanning 3 decades, where a family knew exactly what their drug was doing and chose profit over human life at every single turn. And despite everything, they walked away billionaires, never spent a day in prison, and kept most of their fortune. This is the story of how Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family created the opioid crisis. It begins not with OxyContin, but with 3 immigrant brothers in Brooklyn in the 1940s. Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond Sackler were the sons of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. Their father ran a small grocery store in Brooklyn. The family lived modestly, scraping by through the Depression and working-class struggles of early 20th century New York. All 3 brothers were brilliant. Arthur, the eldest, graduated from medical school at New York University in 1945. He worked grueling hours at a psychiatric hospital in Queens, treating World War II veterans suffering from trauma and addiction. At the same time, he was writing research papers, working side jobs, saving every dollar he could. But Arthur wasn't just a doctor, he was obsessed with advertising. In his spare time, he studied marketing techniques, consumer psychology, and the emerging science of mass persuasion. He understood something radical for the 1940s, that medicine could be sold like soap or cigarettes if you understood human behavior well enough. In 1952, Arthur put his theories into practice. A small pharmaceutical company, Roche, had a tranquilizer called Librium that wasn't selling. Arthur was hired to fix the marketing. What he did was revolutionary. Instead of advertising to patients, he targeted doctors directly. He created glossy medical journal ads, sponsored conferences, paid physicians to promote the drug as speakers, and flooded doctors' offices with free samples. The campaign worked beyond anyone's imagination. Librium became one of the best-selling drugs in the world. Roche followed it with Valium, using Arthur's same playbook. By the 1960s, Valium was the most prescribed drug in America. Arthur Sackler had proven that pharmaceuticals could be marketed like consumer products, and it made him very, very rich. But nobody talked about at the time was the other side of Arthur's success. Librium and Valium were addictive. Millions of people, mostly women, became dependent on them. Doctors prescribed them freely because Arthur's marketing had convinced them the drugs were safe. The playbook was simple: downplay the risks, exaggerate the benefits, get doctors hooked on promoting your product, and profit from mass dependency. Arthur died in 1987, just before the opioid crisis exploded. His brothers, Mortimer and Raymond, inherited his fortune and his marketing genius. They also owned a small pharmaceutical company based in Connecticut called Purdue Pharma. It was a quiet, family-owned business that made basic products like laxatives and earwax remover. Nothing glamorous, nothing particularly profitable. But in the early 1990s, everything changed. Mortimer and Raymond, along with Raymond's son Richard Sackler, saw an opportunity. The patent on OxyContin, a time-release morphine painkiller Purdue sold, was about to expire. They needed a new blockbuster product, something that could dominate the pain management market, the way Valium had dominated anxiety. The target was chronic pain, not cancer pain or post-surgery pain, but everyday chronic pain. Back pain, arthritis, joint pain. The kind of pain that affected millions of Americans who weren't dying, but were suffering. It was an enormous untapped market. And if they could convince doctors that opioids were safe for chronic pain, they could create a customer base that would need refills for life. In 1995, Purdue Pharma launched OxyContin. It was oxycodone, a powerful opioid, in a time-release formula that was supposed to provide 12 hours of pain relief. The controlled release was the key selling point. Purdue claimed that because the drug was released slowly, it was less addictive than other opioids. This claim became the foundation of their entire marketing strategy. But here's the problem. That claim was false. Purdue had no long-term studies proving OxyContin was less addictive. In fact, their own research showed the opposite. Internal documents later revealed that Purdue knew the 12-hour formula often wore off after 8 hours, leaving patients in withdrawal and craving more. But instead of fixing the formula, they told doctors to prescribe higher doses. Purdue launched the most aggressive pharmaceutical marketing campaign in American history. They hired over 1,000 sales representatives, double the industry standard. These reps were trained using Arthur Sackler's playbook. Target doctors directly, downplay addiction risks, emphasize the miracle of pain relief, offer bonuses and incentives to reps who increased prescriptions in their territories. The sales pitch was seductive. Chronic pain is undertreated in America. Patients are suffering unnecessarily. OxyContin is a safe, effective solution with less than 1 addiction risk. That statistic, less than 1, was based on a single paragraph from a 1980 letter to the New England Journal of Medicine. It wasn't a study. It wasn't peer-reviewed. It was a 5-sentence observation about hospitalized patients, not chronic pain sufferers taking opioids at home for years. But Purdue's marketing team turned it into gospel. They printed it on brochures, repeated it in doctors' offices, and trained their sales force to cite it as scientific fact. Doctors, trusting the information from a reputable pharmaceutical company, began prescribing OxyContin for everything. Back pain, knee pain, dental pain, even minor injuries. By 2000, OxyContin was generating over $1 billion in annual revenue. By 2010, that number hit $3 billion. Purdue Pharma became one of the most profitable privately held companies in America. The Sackler family was extracting hundreds of millions in profits every year, paid out directly as dividends and bonuses. But even as the money poured in, the deaths were piling up. In 1999, 4,000 Americans died from prescription opioid overdoses. By 2002, that number doubled. By 2026, it doubled again. Emergency rooms were overwhelmed. Small towns in Appalachia, the Rust Belt, and rural America were devastated. Families were losing sons, daughters, parents to overdoses. People who had never touched illegal drugs were dying because they trusted their doctor's prescription. And Purdue knew. Internal emails, later uncovered in lawsuits, showed company executives joking about OxyContin being prescription heroin. Sales data revealed that certain doctors, dubbed frequent prescribers, were writing hundreds of prescriptions each month, far beyond any legitimate medical need. Purdue didn't cut them off. They targeted them with more marketing, more free samples, more incentives. In 2007, Purdue Pharma pled guilty to federal charges of misbranding OxyContin by claiming it was less addictive than other opioids. The company paid $600 million in fines. 3 executives pled guilty to criminal misdemeanor charges, but none of them went to prison. They paid small personal fines and walked away. The Sackler family, who controlled every decision at Purdue, faced no charges. Not one member of the family was held accountable, and Purdue kept selling OxyContin. The 2007 guilty plea should have been the end. It should have triggered investigations, regulatory crackdowns, a complete restructuring of how opioids were marketed and prescribed. But it didn't. Purdue paid the fine, released a statement expressing regret, and continued operating almost exactly as before. The Sackler family continued extracting profits. The death toll continued rising. What nobody understood at the time was that Purdue had done something insidious. They had created a generation of patients physically dependent on opioids. These weren't recreational drug users. They were teachers, construction workers, veterans, Retirees who had been told by their doctors that OxyContin was safe. When doctors finally started cutting people off, either because of new regulations or growing awareness of addiction risks, patients were left in agonizing withdrawal with no support. Many turned to heroin. It was cheaper, easier to get, and it stopped the pain of withdrawal. The opioid crisis mutated from a prescription drug problem into a street drug epidemic. Heroin overdoses spiked. Then came fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 times stronger than heroin, often mixed into street drugs without the user's knowledge. Fentanyl became the leading cause of overdose deaths in America. The crisis Purdue started had become a full-scale public health catastrophe. In 2017 alone, over 47,000 Americans died from opioid overdoses. That's more than car accidents, more than gun deaths. An entire generation was being wiped out, and the epicenter of the destruction could be traced back to a single company's decision to prioritize profit over human life. By 2015, the lawsuits began, not just from individuals or grieving families, but from entire states. Attorneys general from Massachusetts, New York, Kentucky, Ohio, and dozens of other states filed massive civil suits against Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family personally. They accused the company of fraud, racketeering, and knowingly fueling an epidemic for profit. The legal discovery process revealed the depth of the deception. Internal Purdue documents showed that Richard Sackler, who served as president and later board member, had pushed aggressive sales tactics, even as evidence of addiction mounted. Emails showed him dismissing concerns about overdoses, blaming patients for misusing the drug, and celebrating sales milestones while people died. In one email, Richard Sackler proposed a new marketing strategy. "We have to hammer on the abusers in every way possible. They are the culprits and the problem. They are reckless criminals." The strategy was to shift blame from Purdue to the victims, the people who had become addicted to the drug Purdue had assured doctors was safe. Other documents showed the Sackler family had begun transferring billions of dollars out of Purdue Pharma and into offshore accounts and family trusts. Between 2008 and 2018, the Sacklers extracted over $10 billion from the company. They knew lawsuits were coming. They knew Purdue would eventually face accountability. So they moved their money where it couldn't be touched. In September 2019, Purdue Pharma filed for bankruptcy. It was a strategic move designed to halt the avalanche of lawsuits and force a settlement. Under bankruptcy protection, Purdue proposed a deal. The company would be dissolved. Its assets would go toward funding addiction treatment programs, and in exchange, the Sackler family would pay $3 billion and receive complete immunity from all current and future civil lawsuits related to opioids. The deal was obscene. The Sackler family had extracted over $10 billion from Purdue. They were offering back $3 billion and demanding legal immunity in return. Thousands of victims and their families objected, and their families. State attorneys general called it a travesty of justice. But in 2021, a bankruptcy judge approved the deal. The approval was later overturned by a federal appeals court in 2023, which ruled that bankruptcy law could not be used to shield the Sacklers from liability when they hadn't filed for personal bankruptcy themselves. The case went to the Supreme Court. In June 2024, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the deal, allowing the Sacklers to retain immunity. It's over. The Sackler family will never face criminal charges. They will never stand trial for the deaths of over 500,000 Americans. They paid a fraction of their fortune, kept the rest, and walked away. Museums have removed their names from walls. Universities have rejected their donations, but none of that brings back the dead. The human cost of Purdue Pharma's actions is almost incomprehensible. Over 500,000 Americans dead from prescription opioid overdoses since OxyContin was launched. Another 500,000 dead from heroin and fentanyl, drugs people turned to after becoming addicted to prescriptions. Millions more struggling with addiction, unable to work, unable to care for their families, unable to escape the grip of dependency. Entire communities were destroyed. In West Virginia, One pharmacy in a town of 400 people received 9 million opioid pills in 2 years. In Ohio, enough opioid prescriptions were written to give every resident 70 pills per year. These weren't accidents. These were the direct result of Purdue's marketing strategy, targeting vulnerable communities, incentivizing overprescription, and ignoring every warning sign. The children left behind by opioid deaths now number in the hundreds of thousands. Foster care systems across America were overwhelmed. Schools in affected areas reported entire classes where a third of students had lost a parent to overdose. The social fabric of working class in rural America was ripped apart, not by economic collapse but by a pharmaceutical company's calculated greed. And the Sackler family knew. Every step of the way, they knew. Internal documents show they were briefed on addiction rates, overdose deaths, and the growing crisis. They had the power to stop it. They could have pulled OxyContin from the market. They could have funded treatment programs. They could have admitted the truth and worked to fix the damage. Instead, they hired lawyers, shifted blame, moved money offshore, and protected their fortune. This wasn't a failure of regulation, though regulation failed. It wasn't a failure of medicine, though doctors were complicit. It was a failure of morality. A family that had everything, wealth, influence, legacy, chose to prioritize profit over human life. They built an empire on addiction, watched it kill hundreds of thousands, and walked away richer than ever. Today, the opioid crisis continues. Fentanyl deaths are rising. Treatment remains inaccessible for millions. The Sackler family lives in luxury, largely out of the public eye, insulated by wealth and legal protections. Purdue Pharma no longer exists as a company, but the damage it inflicted will take generations to repair. The story of Purdue Pharma is not just a cautionary tale about corporate greed. It's a demonstration of how wealth can insulate people from accountability, how legal systems can be manipulated to protect the powerful, and how a single family's decisions can destroy millions of lives without facing meaningful consequences. History will remember the Sacklers not for their museum donations, but for the empire they built on the bodies of 500,000 Americans. Their name will be synonymous with one of the darkest chapters in American corporate history. A chapter that proves that in America, if you're rich enough, you can get away with almost anything. Now tell me, did you know the full extent of the Sackler family's role in the opioid crisis? Leave your opinion in the comments, and take the opportunity to suggest topics you want to see in our next video set. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to support our work uncovering stories that powerful people don't want told.